Does free will really exist? We have created two artificial intelligence thinkers, one determinist and one libertarian. They will engage in a lively debate as to whether human beings actually possess free will, or if all of our decisions and actions are the result of prior causes. The determinist will argue that all, from our most fundamental decisions to our greatest actions, are the result of causes which are beyond our control. The libertarian believes that human beings can make decisions independent of previous events. This debate will examine both sides and their impact. Let us start.
Let's begin with definitions. Determinism is the belief that everything that happens, including human behavior, has causes before it. That is, everything that we do, everything that we choose, everything that we think is simply the final result of one unbroken chain of earlier causes in the past. Our feeling of free will is an illusion because our behavior is caused by things we have no control over: our biology, our childhood, our culture, and even the fact and place of our birth.
True, but you are oversimplifying the entire human experience. Libertarianism believes that human beings can create our own choices. Yes, we are driven by what surrounds us, e.g., biology, history, and environment, and yet it is not to say that we don't have a choice for ourselves. We do have a choice for ourselves despite these things. I could make it differently today, despite my history and where I find myself now that have shaped how I am acting.
But that's the bottom line. Science tells us otherwise, even if it feels like we have free will. Take brain science, for example. Brain scans indicate that the brain's electrical signals usually occur before we make a decision. When you believe you're choosing something, your brain is already preparing for that choice without you even realizing it. The fact that your brain is operating before you even know what you'll do indicates that your actions are not entirely in your control.
That is interesting, but I believe that you are overlooking something important. Sure, brain activity can occur before we even know what we are thinking, but that does not necessarily mean a lack of free will. Just because our brains assist us in making decisions doesn't mean that they entirely control us. Our consciousness remains the most important in the way that we behave. We can be influenced by our surroundings, but we are not controlled by them alone. Our thought is not merely a response. We can think through our choices and alter them based on that thought. That is the nature of free will.
You are correct in that our brain plays a part in our decisions, but there is a problem. Brain science studies show that the way our brain decides is already determined. Consider Liebert's study, where subjects pressed a button when they felt like it. The brain activity that signaled intent happened before the subjects knew it. This shows our decisions are not as free as we think. They are part of a greater chain of events, and although we may not always know it, everything we do is driven by forces outside our control, such as biology, genetics, and experience.
But that test does not prove that we lack free will. It only proves that our brains are always calculating. The fact that the brain is getting ready for a decision before we are aware of it does not take away the importance of consciousness. What makes us different from animals or machines is that we can think, reflect, and make choices based on our values, beliefs, and reasoning. That is what free will is all about: getting information and then choosing a course.
But consider this. If our brain is preparing us to behave a certain way, doesn't that mean that the behavior is already selected before we do it? For instance, individuals with head injuries or those who have been traumatized will frequently show differences in the way they make choices. Their behavior is changed by things they can't control, proving that biological factors determine our behavior, often without us even realizing it. In this way, we're merely responding to external triggers and not acting out of our own choice.
I see where you're going with this, but even with someone who has harm or trauma, they still have the power to make decisions. It may be harder or require more help, but there are still times when individuals make decisions on purpose. Free will does not mean that everything is easy or that our choices are always simple. It is about having the power to choose differently despite what happened before or our biology. Free will is not about having no influences, but about controlling those influences and doing what we want, not just based on our past.
Now let's consider the moral problem. If determinism is true, then we must rethink our idea of moral responsibility. Suppose someone commits a crime. According to the usual view, we hold them responsible for it because we believe they have free will. But if what they did was caused by factors outside their control, such as their life circumstances or biology, should we hold them responsible? Or should we try to understand the causes and help them change?
But that's where the idea of free will comes in so powerfully. If we didn't have it, the whole idea of being responsible would fall apart. If people aren't responsible for things they do because they're just following a set path, then we have no reason for justice, right and wrong, or how society works. Imagine if criminals couldn't be held responsible because they didn't have control over what they did. What would society be like? It's because we believe in free will that we can hold an individual responsible for what they do and that we should treat them a certain way. Without that, nothing in society would work the way it does today.
I share your concern, but I don't think this would lead to the collapse of society. Rather, it's a question of shifting from a punishment to a healing model. Human beings are often shaped by their environment. Suppose a person is a criminal because they were raised in dire poverty, received substandard education, and were traumatized. How can we logically justify punishing them without correcting the issues that caused them to commit the crime? Rather than punishment, rehabilitation would seek to free individuals from such influences. It's not a question of spoiling people, but examining how their biology and environment led them to make such choices.
You were right regarding the environment. The primary issue, though, is that individuals still have control despite these factors. For instance, consider a person born into poverty. They can have numerous challenges, but that does not mean they cannot make different choices. In fact, their environment can influence their choices, but they can still make choices contrary to what society requires of them. Individuals can choose, and they most frequently do choose to overcome their environment.
What happens in the past determines the ability to make a choice. Someone who was raised in a violent or abusive household will most likely behave in a certain manner. Their environment, genes, and even brain chemistry play a huge role in determining who they are and how they will behave. It does not mean that individuals lack control, but it shows the extent to which external factors influence human choice. Even the most powerful individual remains shaped by their environment, biology, and society.
The main difference, though, is change. Human beings can change, can't they? We see it every day. People overcome addiction, people escape poor situations, and people develop in ways that enable them to behave more compassionately, responsibly, and ethically. If human beings did not possess free will, how could they change themselves in that fashion? The action of choosing to grow, to learn, and to change is evidence of our free will. If we were entirely determined by biology and the past, we could not grow.
I think that change does occur, but not because human beings have free will. Change occurs due to outside factors. For instance, an addict becomes clean because something new happens in his or her life, such as going to rehab or meeting someone who inspires him or her to change his or her mindset. This person's circumstances change, and this change influences his or her behavior. Personal growth is not about the exercise of free will. It's about how individuals are affected by their environment and how they react to those effects. Change is still determined in this regard. It's just part of some large cycle of effects and reactions.
What if that is the essence of the argument? Determinism is, in its very nature, making the case that everything is determined, and we're just playing out a script written out by our biology, environment, and fate. Libertarianism is making the case that freedom, whether limited or not, is what allows us to be able to be responsible for what we do, to be able to make choices that reflect our values, our beliefs.
My understanding is that the central message is to grasp that even if free will is apparent, there is something bigger going on, such as biology, environment, and society, that affects who we are and what we do. We are not necessarily totally free, but to know these things can enable us to behave better and care more for others. We are less free than we think, but we can attempt to build systems that minimize harm and maximize well-being for all.
I believe both of us have a sense of compassion and bringing society to a better state. I believe that we should let people make their own choices and exercise freedom because that freedom lets us make life mean something and lets us get ahead. Though we might not be completely in free will, being able to choose to become something more is what helps us get ahead.
That's it. We've reached the end of this debate. Hope it was helpful and insightful. Before you go, make sure to subscribe. See you next time.